The champagne glass slipped from my fingers as Ryan's words cut through the elegant chatter of our 7th anniversary celebration. The crystal shattered against the polished marble floor of the Observatory Restaurant, creating a symphony of destruction that seemed to echo the breaking of my world. But instead of tears, instead of the shocked gasp everyone expected, something else escaped my lips. A laugh, low, knowing, and utterly terrifying in its confidence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ryan froze mid-sentence, his arm still wrapped possessively around my twin sister Sophia's waist. The color drained from both their faces as that sound continued to bubble up from somewhere deep inside me, growing stronger with each passing second. Around us, Portland's social elite stood paralyzed, their phones already recording what they assumed would be a spectacular breakdown. They had no idea they were about to witness something far more devastating. 7 years of marriage, 3 years of meticulous planning, and 31 years of knowing exactly who my twin sister really was had all led to this moment. As I stood there in my emerald silk gown, blood-red lipstick still perfect despite the chaos, I realized that everything was about to change forever. The puppet show was about to end, and I was the one holding all the strings. The morning of our anniversary had started like any other day in our Pearl District penthouse, with Ryan methodically going through his routine while I observed from behind my laptop screen. 7 years of marriage had taught me to read the subtle signs that others miss. The way his left eye twitched when he was lying, the unconscious shoulder roll when he felt guilty, the specific way he cleared his throat before delivering rehearsed lines. This morning, all 3 tells were present in abundance. "Happy anniversary. Beautiful," he said, approaching with coffee and what I recognized as his practiced smile. The same expression he used during client presentations at his architectural firm, professional, polished, completely hollow. I accepted the mug with the genuine warmth I'd perfected over years of marriage. 7 years, can you believe it? Feels like yesterday, he replied, and there was the throat clearing. Right on schedule. While he showered, I opened my encrypted laptop and reviewed the final pieces of evidence I'd been collecting. 3 years of investigation, condensed into digital files that would reshape multiple lives before the day ended. Bank statements showing regular transfers to offshore accounts. Email threads discussing business acquisitions that skirted legal boundaries. Text messages that revealed a network of manipulations stretching back over 2 decades. And at the center of it all, my twin sister Sophia. The irony wasn't lost on me that while everyone assumed I was the controlled, analytical twin and Sophia was the free-spirited wellness guru, the reality was far more complex. Sophia had built her empire on the illusion of helping others find peace and authentic living, while systematically controlling and exploiting everyone around her, including, as I'd recently discovered, my own husband. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "So excited for tonight. I have a special surprise for you both." I smiled as I typed back. "I'm sure you do. I have something special planned too." The Serenity Wellness Center occupied an entire converted warehouse in Portland's trendy east side, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows designed to project authenticity and openness. The perfect facade for someone whose business model relied on appearing transparent while operating in shadows. I'd helped Sophia secure the initial funding for this place 5 years ago, using my connections in the business world to legitimize her vision. Back then, I'd believed in her mission of helping people overcome trauma and find their authentic selves. It took me 3 years to realize that Sophia's definition of helping people involved creating their dependencies on her guidance, their financial investments in her programs, and their emotional vulnerabilities that she could exploit when needed. She'd perfected a system that made people believe they couldn't function without her wisdom, her retreats, her expensive ongoing counseling sessions. I parked across the street and watched the steady stream of clients entering for their morning session. Successful professionals, struggling artists, recovering addicts, divorced parents, seeking stability. They all shared the same slightly desperate expression of people convinced they'd found their salvation. What they didn't know was that Sophia had carefully cultivated that desperation, stretching their healing journeys far beyond what was necessary or healthy, keeping them dependent and paying. Dr. Caroline West emerged from the building, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the Portland sun. Sophia's business partner and the licensed therapist who provided legal cover for practices that would have raised serious ethical questions if anyone bothered to investigate. Caroline's credentials were impeccable, her reputation sterling, her willingness to look the other way when Sophia pushed boundaries apparently limitless, as long as the profits continued flowing. I'd been documenting their partnership for 18 months, ever since I'd discovered Caroline's role in what they privately called client lifecycle management. The process of identifying vulnerable individuals, extending their treatment indefinitely, and slowly assuming control over major life decisions under the guise of therapeutic guidance. Some clients had been in Sophia's programs for over 4 years, spending thousands monthly while making little actual progress toward independence. My phone rang as I sat watching. Sophia's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with practiced sisterly warmth. "Natalie, are you busy? I need to run something by you about tonight." "Never too busy for you. What's up?" "Well, you know how much Ryan has been struggling lately with work stress and his father's health issues. I've been providing some informal support, just sister-in-law helping family, but I think tonight might be the perfect time to suggest he consider joining one of our intensive programs." The audacity was breathtaking. Sophia had been secretly counseling my husband for 3 months, slowly undermining his confidence in our marriage, while positioning herself as his emotional salvation. I'd discovered their sessions through hidden cameras I'd installed in my own home, after noticing Ryan's increasingly distant behavior and his sudden interest in wellness philosophy that sounded suspiciously like Sophia's branded terminology. "That's so thoughtful of you," I replied, my voice steady despite the fury building inside. "Ryan's been different lately, more introspective." "Exactly. I think he's ready for some real breakthrough work. The kind of deep healing that can transform someone's entire perspective on life and relationship." Translation: she was ready to complete the psychological manipulation that would convince Ryan our marriage was holding him back from his authentic self, conveniently available through expensive programs at Serenity Wellness Center. "Should I be I asked, playing the worried wife perfectly. "Oh no, sweetie, this is all positive. Sometimes people need to examine whether their current life structures are serving their highest good. It doesn't mean anything is wrong, just that growth requires honest evaluation." The therapy speak was flawless, designed to sound supportive while planting seeds of doubt. Sophia had refined this approach over years of practice, using her twin bond with me to gather intimate details about my marriage that she could later weaponize in her sessions with Ryan. "I trust your judgment completely," I said. "You've always known what's best for the people you love." After hanging up, I sat in my car reviewing audio recordings from the previous night. Hidden microphones throughout our penthouse had captured Ryan on a lengthy phone call with someone he called S. The conversation revealed the depth of Sophia's psychological manipulation and Ryan's complete surrender to her guide. "I feel like I've been living someone else's life," Ryan had said, "like I've been following a script instead of making authentic choices." "That awareness is the first step toward freedom," Sophia's voice responded, "but breaking free requires courage. Sometimes we have to hurt people we care about in order to honor our truth." "What about Natalie? I can't just abandon her." "You're not abandoning anyone. You're choosing growth over stagnation, authenticity over comfort. Natalie is strong. She'll understand eventually, and if she doesn't, that reveals something about the foundation your relationship was built on." The manipulation was textbook, using therapeutic language to justify betrayal while making Ryan feel enlightened rather than guilty. Sophia had spent months convincing him that leaving me wasn't selfish, but necessary for his psychological development. What neither of them knew was that I'd been using their secret sessions to build my own case. Every session Ryan attended provided me with more evidence of Sophia's unethical practices. Every revelation about their growing emotional affair gave me additional leverage for what was coming. I drove to my office at Harper & Associates, the marketing firm I'd built from nothing over the past 8 years. The irony of working in an industry built on perception and persuasion while uncovering my sister's empire of manipulation wasn't lost on me. My skills in understanding consumer psychology had proven invaluable in recognizing the techniques Sophia used to control her clients and steal my husband. Patricia Ford, my business mentor and the closest thing I had to a mother figure, was waiting in my office with coffee and the sympathetic expression of someone who'd suspected this day was coming. "How are you holding up?" she asked as I settled behind my desk. "Better than they expect," I replied. "Everything's ready for tonight." Patricia had been instrumental in helping me document Sophia's business practices. Her background in investigative journalism before transitioning to marketing had provided crucial insights into evidence gathering and legal procedure. More importantly, she'd helped me understand the psychological profiles of people like Sophia, individuals who used others' trauma and vulnerability as opportunities for exploitation. "Are you sure you want to do this publicly?" Patricia asked. "The fallout will be significant." "It has to be public," I explained. "Sophia's power comes from her reputation and the network of people who enable her practices. Privacy would allow her to control the narrative and minimize the damage. Public exposure removes her ability to manipulate the story." We spent the morning reviewing final preparations. The guest list for our anniversary dinner included not just friends and family but several of Sophia's high-profile clients, business partners and the Portland wellness community leaders who'd helped legitimize her practices. Caroline West would be there, along with Lucas Bennett, Sophia's business partner who handled the financial side of their operation. I'd spent 2 years cultivating relationships with these people, positioning myself as the supportive sister who wanted to help promote Sophia's important work. They trusted me, confided in me, shared information they would never have revealed to an outsider. That trust would make tonight's revelations all the more devastating. At noon, I received a text from Ryan. "Can't wait to celebrate with you tonight. I love you." The words that once would have filled me with warmth now felt like mockery, but I texted back exactly what he expected. "I love you too. Tonight will be unforgettable." My afternoon appointment was with Grace Thompson, a longtime family friend who'd known Sophia and me since childhood. Grace worked in social services and had been one of the first people to express subtle concerns about some of Sophia's methods. Our conversation today would provide the final piece of professional credibility I needed for tonight's revelation. "I've been documenting some irregularities," I told Grace as we sat in a quiet corner of Powell's books, surrounded by the comforting presence of thousands of stories, most with more traditional happy endings than mine was likely to have. Grace reviewed the files I'd prepared, her expression growing increasingly grave as she absorbed the evidence. Financial exploitation of vulnerable clients, unlicensed therapeutic practices, deliberate extension of treatment programs for financial gain, emotional manipulation disguised as spiritual guidance. "This is extensive," Grace said finally, "and deeply troubling. Some of these practices could constitute fraud." That's what I thought, but I needed a professional opinion before taking action. "Natalie, you realize this will destroy more than just Sophia's business. People who've trusted her, who've built their recovery around her programs, they're going to feel betrayed and lost." "I know, but how many more people will she damage if this continues? How many marriages will she destroy while pretending to heal them?" Grace nodded slowly. "You're right. This has to stop. But are you prepared for the personal cost?" The question hung between us like a challenge. Was I prepared to lose my sister, my marriage, and potentially my standing in Portland's tight-knit business community? Was I ready to become the person who destroyed the wellness guru beloved by hundreds of clients? "I'm prepared for the truth," I answered, "whatever the cost." As evening approached, I returned home to prepare for what would be either the most satisfying or most devastating night of my life. Ryan was already dressed in his best suit, looking handsome and nervous in a way that once would have charmed me. Now I recognized it as guilt rather than excitement about our anniversary. "You look incredible," he said as I emerged from our bedroom wearing the emerald silk gown I'd chosen specifically for tonight. The color complemented my dark hair and fair skin while projecting confidence and power. I wanted to look like someone in complete control because by the end of the evening I would be. "Thank you. Are you ready for our big night?" "More than ready," Ryan replied, and I caught the subtle emphasis that suggested he knew exactly what kind of night this would be. just not the version I had planned. The Observatory Restaurant occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse with panoramic views of Portland's skyline and the Cascade Mountains beyond. Sophia had chosen the venue, insisting that the elevated setting would provide the perfect atmosphere for what she termed a celebration of growth and new beginning. The restaurant's glass walls and open design ensured that whatever happened tonight would be visible to everyone present, with no dark corners for private conversations or discreet exits. We arrived to find 30 of Portland's most influential people already gathered, drinks in hand, admiring the sunset views while engaging in the kind of sophisticated small talk that concealed as much as it revealed. I recognized faces from Sophia's client roster mixed with business leaders, wellness industry professionals, and the social climbers who attached themselves to any gathering that promised networking opportunity. Sophia glided toward us wearing flowing white pants and a gold silk blouse that caught the light like armor. Her dark hair, identical to mine but styled in loose waves instead of my sleek updo, framed a face that radiated the serene confidence of someone completely certain of their moral superiority. To observers, we looked like successful sisters celebrating a family milestone. Only I knew we were predators circling each other waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Natalie, Ryan, you both look absolutely radiant. Sophia embraced us with the warmth of someone genuinely happy to see family, her performance flawless as always. This is incredible, Sophia. Thank you for arranging everything, I replied, matching her energy while noting the subtle way she positioned herself between Ryan and me during our conversation. Throughout the cocktail hour, I watched Sophia work the room with the skill of a master manipulator. She moved from group to group, dispensing wisdom and collecting vulnerability, each interaction strengthening the web of influence that had taken her years to build. People leaned in when she spoke, their faces reflecting the desperate hope of individuals convinced they'd found someone who truly understood their pain. Dr. Caroline West approached with champagne and her professional smile. Natalie, congratulations on 7 wonderful years. Ryan is such a lucky man. Thank you, Caroline. I feel like the lucky one. Ryan's been doing some beautiful personal growth work lately. I'm sure you've noticed during your sessions how much more centered he's become. Caroline's smile faltered slightly, the first crack in her composed facade. She hadn't expected me to know about her private sessions with Ryan, meetings that violated multiple ethical boundaries given her business relationship with Sophia. I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean, Caroline replied carefully. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Oh, the wellness coaching you've been providing. Ryan mentioned how helpful your conversations have been in helping him examine his life choices. It's wonderful when therapy truly helps someone see their situation clearly. The word therapy hit Caroline like a physical blow. As a licensed professional, she knew exactly how problematic her unlicensed sessions with Ryan had become, especially given the obvious conflict of interest with Sophia's personal involvement. I think there might be some confusion, Caroline said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm sure there is, I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Confusion seems to be going around lately. Lucas Bennett joined our conversation, his usual confidence slightly diminished by the tension he could feel but couldn't identify. As Sophia's business partner, Lucas handled the financial operations that had enabled years of exploitation while maintaining plausible deniability about the methods used to generate their impressive profits. Ladies, you both look lovely tonight. Natalie, Sophia tells me your marketing firm has been incredibly successful. We should discuss collaboration opportunities. I'd love that, Lucas. I've become very interested in the wellness industry lately, especially the business models that seem almost too good to be true. Lucas's expression shifted as he processed the subtle threat in my words. Like Caroline, he was beginning to sense that tonight might not proceed according to Sophia's careful planning. As dinner was announced, I noticed Ryan engaging in quiet conversation with Tyler Adams, his best friend since college, and the one person who'd expressed reservations about Ryan's recent personality changes. Tyler had called me twice in the past month, concerned about Ryan's new vocabulary of therapeutic terms and his sudden questioning of commitments that had previously seemed solid. Tyler looks worried, I observed to Ryan as we moved toward our assigned table. He's just being overprotective. You know how he gets when he thinks someone he cares about is making major life changes. Major life changes, I repeated. That's an interesting way to describe personal growth. Ryan's eyes met mine with a flicker of something that might have been guilt or fear. Natalie, tonight is going to be special for us. I hope you understand that everything I do comes from love. The statement was clearly rehearsed, part of whatever script Sophia had provided for breaking up with me in the most psychologically manipulative way possible. The language was designed to make me feel grateful for my own abandonment, to frame his betrayal as an act of compassion rather than selfishness. I'm sure it will be special, I replied. I have some thoughts to share tonight too. The dinner tables were arranged to maximize intimacy while ensuring clear sightlines throughout the space. Sophia had positioned herself at the head table with Ryan and me flanking her like subjects attending their queen. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but then again subtle manipulation had never been Sophia's style. She preferred the bold approach, overwhelming people with confidence and apparent wisdom until they forgot to question her motivation. As the first course was served, Sophia tapped her wineglass and stood to address the gathering. The room fell silent, all attention focused on the woman who'd positioned herself as Portland's premier wellness authority. Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 7 years of marriage between two people I love deeply, she began, her voice carrying the warm authority that had built her empire. Natalie and Ryan represent something beautiful in this world. The courage to commit, to grow together and to support each other's journey toward authentic living. The words were perfect, designed to make what came next seem like a natural evolution rather than a calculated betrayal. I could see Ryan shifting uncomfortably beside me, the weight of what he was about to do finally registering despite months of psychological preparation. Growth requires honesty, Sophia continued. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is acknowledge when our paths are leading us in different directions. When staying together becomes a barrier to becoming who we're meant to be. A murmur rippled through the gathering as people began to sense that this wasn't going to be a traditional anniversary celebration. Phones appeared discreetly as Portland's social media enthusiasts prepared to document whatever was about to unfold. Ryan has been doing some deep work lately, examining his life with the kind of courage that most people never find. And through that work, he's discovered some important truths about himself and what he needs to thrive. I felt Ryan's hand find mine under the table, but instead of comfort, his touch felt like an apology for what was coming. Across the table, Dr. Caroline West was staring into her wineglass, her professional composure beginning to crack under the weight of what she'd helped orchestrate. So tonight, instead of celebrating the past, we're going to celebrate growth, change, and the beautiful complexity of human relationships. Sophia's eyes met mine as she paused, her expression a mixture of triumph and what might have been regret. She was giving me one last moment to object, to create a scene that would make her look like the reasonable peacemaker rather than the architect of destruction. Instead, I smiled and raised my wineglass. To growth, I said clearly, my voice carrying across the suddenly tense room, to the beautiful complexity of human relationships. Sophia blinked, clearly not expecting this response. Ryan's hand tightened on mine as he realized that something was different about my reaction than what they'd anticipated. Ryan would like to share something with everyone, Sophia announced, retaking control of the moment. Ryan stood slowly, his face pale but determined. The room was completely silent now, every person present understanding that they were about to witness something significant. Natalie, he began, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was about to say. You've been an incredible wife, and I've loved you for 7 years, but love sometimes means making difficult choices for the good of everyone involved. The therapeutic language was unmistakable, each phrase carefully crafted to sound selfless while justifying betrayal. I could practically hear Sophia's coaching in every word. I've discovered that I haven't been living authentic. That our marriage, as beautiful as it's been, was built on a version of myself that I now realize wasn't true to who I really am. Gasps began to ripple through the crowd as the implications became clear. This wasn't a renewal of vows or a recommitment ceremony. This was a public divorce announcement, disguised as personal growth. Sophia has helped me understand that sometimes the most loving thing we can do is let go of relationships that no longer serve our highest good. So tonight, I want to publicly acknowledge that I'm choosing to end our marriage so that we can both find the authentic love we deserve." The silence that followed was deafening. 30 of Portland's most influential people sat frozen, their phones recording a moment that would reshape multiple reputations and relationships. And then, as Ryan turned to embrace Sophia in front of everyone, as she melted into his arms with the satisfied smile of someone whose plan had worked perfectly, as the crowd began to murmur in shock and disapproval, I began to laugh. It started quietly, a small sound that seemed almost like a sob, but then it grew, building into something clear and confident, and utterly terrifying to anyone who understood what it meant. Ryan and Sophia broke apart, staring at me in confusion, as my laughter continued to fill the elegant restaurant. This wasn't part of their script. The abandoned wife was supposed to cry, to rage, to make a scene that would justify their narrative of outgrowing a dramatic relationship. Instead, I stood gracefully, my emerald gown catching the light from the crystal chandeliers, my red lipstick still perfect despite the chaos they'd tried to create in my life. "Thank you, Sophia," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the stunned room. "That was absolutely perfect timing." Confusion rippled across Sophia's face as she processed my unexpected reaction. This wasn't the script she'd written in her head, where the wronged wife would collapse in tears or explode in righteous fury, providing perfect justification for Ryan's decision to leave our marriage for authentic love, with her enlightened guide. Instead, I stood there radiating a calm confidence that seemed to unsettle everyone in the room. "Natalie?" Ryan's voice cracked slightly as he released Sophia and took a step toward me. "Are you okay?" "I'm perfect," I replied, smoothing my emerald silk dress and reaching for my purse. "In fact, I've never been better. Please, don't let me interrupt your beautiful moment of authentic truth-telling." The sarcasm in my voice was subtle enough that the crowd might have missed it, but Sophia caught every nuance. Her eyes narrowed as she studied my face, searching for signs of the breakdown she'd anticipated. Instead, she found something that clearly disturbed her far more than tears would have. "Maybe we should sit down and talk privately," Sophia suggested, her wellness guru voice taking on a slight edge. "This is a lot to process, and sometimes our initial reactions aren't our most authentic responses." "Oh, I think my response is completely authentic," I said, pulling out my phone and glancing at the screen. "In fact, I'd say this is the most honest I've been in years." Dr. Caroline West shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her professional instincts apparently warning her that something was very wrong with this scenario. Lucas Bennett was frowning at his own phone, his business-focused mind already calculating potential damage to Serenity Wellness Center from this public spectacle. "Natalie?" Ryan tried again, his voice taking on the patient tone I'd heard him use during practice sessions with Sophia. "I know this is painful, but growth often requires us to sit with discomfort until we can see the gift within it." The therapeutic language that had once sounded profound to him now felt hollow in the elegant restaurant setting, surrounded by people who were beginning to recognize that they were witnessing something far more complex than a simple marriage dissolution. "The gift?" I repeated thoughtfully. "Yes, I can definitely see the gift in this moment." "Ryan, sweetheart, do you remember what I do for a living?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. "You run a marketing firm, Harper and Associates." "That's right. I understand consumer psychology, behavioral patterns, and most importantly, how to build compelling narratives that influence people's decisions. It's actually a skill set that overlaps quite a bit with what Sophia does, wouldn't you say?" I turned to address my twin sister directly, noting how her serene mask was beginning to slip as she realized this conversation wasn't following any script she'd prepared. "After all, Sophia, your entire business model is built on understanding what people need to hear in order to make the choices you want them to make. The language of empowerment that actually creates dependency. The promise of authentic living that requires constant guidance from you to achieve." "It's really quite brilliant marketing." Grace Thompson, my longtime family friend, had gone pale as she recognized the dangerous undercurrent in my words. As someone who worked in social services, she understood the implications of what I was suggesting about Sophia's practice. "I think we're all feeling a lot of intense emotions right now," Sophia said, employing her most soothing tone. Maybe this isn't the best environment for processing such a significant life transition. On the contrary, I replied, my voice carrying clearly across the increasingly tense restaurant. I think this is the perfect environment. After all, you chose it specifically because you wanted witnesses to Ryan's transformation, didn't you? You wanted people to see him making this brave choice to leave his inauthentic marriage for something more real. Sophia's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger before she regained control. Natalie, you're clearly upset, and you're not thinking clearly. Ryan's decision isn't about you personally. It's about his journey toward authentic self-expression. His journey, I said, nodding thoughtfully. The one you've been guiding for the past 6 months through unlicensed therapy sessions in our home, while I was at work. The words dropped into the room like stones into still water, creating ripples of shock that reached every table. Dr. Caroline West's wine glass slipped from her fingers, sending red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. That's not. Caroline started, then stopped, realizing that anything she said would only make the situation worse. Oh, I'm sorry, Caroline. Were those licensed therapy sessions? Because I have recordings of several conversations where you and Sophia discussed Ryan's treatment plan, his progress toward making what you called necessary life changes, and the specific techniques you were using to help him overcome his resistance to growth. The silence in the restaurant was now complete. Even the servers had stopped moving, sensing that they were witnessing something that would be talked about in Portland's social circles for years to come. I don't know what you think you heard, Sophia said carefully, but Ryan came to me voluntarily, seeking support during a difficult time in his life. As his sister-in-law, I felt obligated to help. Sister-in-law, I repeated, savoring the words. Is that what we're calling it? Because the text messages between you and Ryan tell a very different story. Messages that started 3 months ago, coincidentally, right after Ryan began his wellness journey at Serenity. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through what appeared to be text screenshots. Should I read some of them? There are some particularly interesting exchanges about how marriage can be a soul cage that prevents people from accessing their true power. Ryan had gone completely white, staring at my phone as if it contained nuclear secrets, which, in a way, it did. How do you have our... He started, then stopped, the implications hitting him like a physical blow. Our home security system, I explained conversationally. You know, the one Sophia recommended we install for safety. It has some very sophisticated features, audio recording for instance, digital message backup, really cutting-edge technology for monitoring behavior patterns. Sophia's composed facade finally cracked completely. You've been spying on us. I've been documenting evidence, I corrected. There's an important distinction. Spying suggests secrecy and deception. Documentation suggests preparation and protection. I turned to address the restaurant full of people, many of whom I'd specifically invited for this moment. You see, everyone here tonight is part of Portland's wellness and business community. Many of you have worked with Sophia, invested in her programs, or referred clients to Serenity Wellness Center. So I thought you should know about some interesting patterns I've discovered in how those programs actually operate. Lucas Bennett stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. Natalie, I think you need to be very careful about what you're suggesting. Making unfounded accusations could have serious legal consequences. Legal consequences, I mean, that's interesting, Lucas, because I've been wondering about the legal implications of several business practices at Serenity. For instance, the way client treatment plans seem to extend indefinitely, keeping people in expensive programs for years without measurable progress toward independence. That's completely normal in therapeutic settings, Dr. Caroline West interjected, finding her professional voice despite her obvious panic. Healing is a non-linear process that can't be rushed. Of course, I agree. But when that non-linear process consistently results in clients spending their life savings while becoming more dependent rather than more empowered, it starts to look less like healing and more like exploitation. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small folder, placing it on the table where everyone could see it. I've been investigating Serenity Wellness Center for the past 18 months, financial records, client outcomes, business practices, Licensing violation. It makes for fascinating reading. The folder sat on the white tablecloth like a bomb waiting to explode. Around the room I could see people calculating their exposure, their involvement, their potential liability for supporting or participating in Sophia's empire. You see, I continued, Sophia has built something remarkable here, a system that identifies vulnerable people, convinces them they need extensive healing, and then provides that healing in a way that ensures they never actually recover enough to leave. It's like a subscription model for emotional dependency. Tyler Adams, Ryan's best friend, was staring at his phone with growing alarm. As a software engineer, he understood technology better than most people in the room, and he was apparently discovering just how comprehensively I documented everything: the text messages, the recordings, the financial transfers. Tyler said slowly. How long have you been collecting all this? 3 years, I replied. Ever since I noticed that clients at Serenity seemed to be getting worse rather than better over time. When people who should have been graduating from programs after 6 months were still there after 3 years, spending money they couldn't afford on treatments that kept them perpetually on the verge of breakthrough without ever actually breaking through. Sophia was now visibly shaking, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. You're destroying people's faith in healing. These clients trust me. They've made real progress. Have they? I challenged. Because according to the files I've reviewed, your success rate for clients achieving independence from your programs is less than 5%. Most legitimate therapy has success rates above 70% for measurable improvement within the first year. Grace Thompson spoke up from her table, her social services background giving weight to her words. Natalie, are you saying that Sophia has been deliberately keeping clients dependent? I'm saying that Sophia has created a business model that profits from people not getting better. The longer someone stays in her programs, the more money she makes. The more dependent they become on her guidance, the more control she has over their major life decisions, including decisions about their relationship. I turned back to Ryan, who was staring at me with a mixture of horror and dawning recognition. Tell me, darling, when did you first start questioning our marriage? Was it before or after your first session with Sophia? That's not fair, Ryan protested weakly. The problems in our marriage existed before I started working with her. What problems? I asked. Be specific. What issues did we have that were significant enough to end a 7-year marriage? Ryan opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly struggling to articulate complaints that had seemed valid during his sessions with Sophia, but now sounded petty and manufactured. We grew apart, he said finally. We wanted different things. What different things? I wanted to explore my authentic self, and you were committed to maintaining the status quo. The therapeutic language sounded ridiculous in his own voice, as if he was reciting someone else's words rather than expressing his own feeling. And when exactly did you discover this desire for authentic self-exploration? I pressed. Was it perhaps around the time Sophia suggested that traditional marriages often limit personal growth? Dr. Caroline West tried to intervene. Natalie, you're taking therapeutic concepts out of context. The work Ryan has been doing is legitimate personal development. Legitimate, I repeated. Caroline, as a licensed therapist, can you explain the ethical implications of providing couples counseling to your business partner's sister-in-law without the spouse's knowledge or consent? Caroline's face went ashen as she realized the trap she'd walked into. The ethical violations were clear and career-ending, assuming I had evidence to support my claims. I never provided couples counseling, Caroline said carefully. I offered individual support to Ryan during a difficult period. Individual support that focused specifically on his marriage and included detailed discussions about his wife's shortcomings and limitations. Individual support that your business partner happened to participate in, despite having no professional credentials whatsoever. I opened the folder on the table, revealing what appeared to be printed transcripts. Would you like me to read some excerpts from your session? There are some particularly interesting sections where you and Sophia role-play conversations Ryan might have with me about ending our marriage. The restaurant had become completely silent, except for the sound of phones buzzing as news of the confrontation began spreading through Portland's social media networks. Several people were already leaving, recognizing that their association with Serenity Wellness Center was about to become a liability. "This is insane," Sophia said, her voice rising for the first time. "You're destroying everything I've built based on paranoid conspiracy theories, I mused. "Lucas, would you like to explain to everyone how Serenity's financial structure works, specifically how client payments are processed through multiple shell companies to avoid oversight?" Lucas Bennett was now frantically typing on his phone, probably alerting lawyers and accountants to the crisis that was about to engulf their business empire. "Our financial structure is completely legal," Lucas said without looking up from his phone. "Legal, yes. Ethical, questionable. Transparent, absolutely not. For instance, clients think they're paying for therapy and wellness programs, but their money is actually being filtered through companies that provide kickbacks to referring therapists, fund Sophia's personal lifestyle, and pay for marketing designed to attract more vulnerable clients." I stood and walked to the center of the restaurant, addressing the crowd directly. "Everyone here tonight has some connection to Serenity Wellness Center. Some of you are clients. Some are referring professionals. Some are investors. I thought you should know that the business you've been supporting operates more like a cult than a legitimate therapeutic practice." "That's a serious accusation," Grace Thompson said, her professional training making her careful about inflammatory language. "It's an accurate description," I replied. "Isolation from outside perspectives, financial exploitation, dependency on a charismatic leader, gradual assumption of control over major life decisions. The only difference is that Sophia uses therapeutic language instead of religious doctrine." Patricia Ford, my business mentor, had been silent throughout the confrontation, but now she spoke up. "Natalie, what's your goal here? What do you want to achieve with these revelations?" The question hung in the air, as everyone waited for my response. What did I want? Justice for the clients who'd been exploited, revenge against my sister for stealing my husband, protection for future victims of her manipulative practices. "I want people to understand what they've been participating in," I said finally. "Sophia has built her empire on the promise of helping people find their authentic selves, while systematically destroying their ability to trust their own judgment. She's created an entire network of dependent clients who can't make major decisions without her approval." I turned to Ryan, my voice softening slightly. "Including you, sweetheart. When was the last time you made an important choice without checking with Sophia first? When did you last have an opinion that didn't align perfectly with something she'd taught you during your session?" Ryan stared at me, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and what might have been the first stirrings of clarity he'd experienced in months. "That's not, I mean, she helped me understand. She helped you understand that your wife was holding you back from your true potential, that your marriage was preventing you from accessing your authentic self, that choosing her over me would be an act of brave self-expression rather than simple betrayal." The words hung between us, cutting through months of psychological manipulation with uncomfortable clarity. "Ryan," Sophia said, her voice taking on the urgent tone of someone losing control, "don't let her manipulate you. This is exactly the kind of emotional abuse we've been working to free you from." "Emotional abuse," I repeat. "Sophia, would you like to explain to everyone your theory about emotional abuse, specifically your belief that asking questions about therapeutic practices constitutes abuse of vulnerable clients?" I pulled out my phone and scrolled to what appeared to be an audio. This is from a session 3 weeks ago, where Sophia explained to Ryan why my concerns about his spending on wellness programs was actually a form of psychological control designed to keep him dependent on me. The irony was so perfect that several people in the restaurant actually laughed despite the tension. "You see," I continued, "Sophia has created a system where any resistance to her methods is reframed as evidence that the resistance is necessary. If clients question their progress, they're told that questioning is part of the healing process. If family members express concern, they're labeled as obstacles to growth. It's completely circular logic that makes Sophia always right and everyone else always wrong." Dr. Caroline West made one last attempt to salvage the situation. "Natalie, I understand you're hurt and angry, but you're mischaracterizing legitimate therapeutic techniques. Sometimes healing does require people to examine whether their current relationships support their growth." "Sometimes," I agreed, But when that examination is guided by someone who profits financially and emotionally from the client choosing separation, it's not therapy, it's manipulation disguised as healing. I walked back to our table and picked up the folder, holding it where everyone could see. This contains documentation of 37 cases where Serenity clients ended long-term relationships during their treatment. 37 marriages, partnerships and family connections severed based on Sophia's guidance about authentic living and personal growth. The number hit the room like a physical blow. 37 relationships destroyed wasn't an unfortunate side effect of healing work. It was a pattern of systematic destruction. In 34 of those cases, I continued, the clients became more financially dependent on Serenity's programs after ending their relationships. They lost emotional support systems, financial stability, and social connections, making them more vulnerable to Sophia's influence. Tyler Adams was now staring at Ryan with obvious alarm. Dude, is this true? Have you been planning to leave Natalie this whole time? Ryan looked between Tyler, me, and Sophia, his confusion evident as he struggled to reconcile what he'd been taught with what he was hearing. I thought Sophia helped me understand that I wasn't being authentic in my marriage, that I was living someone else's expectations instead of my own truth. Whose truth, Ryan? I asked gently, because the words you're using aren't words you ever used before starting sessions with Sophia. The concepts you're describing aren't ideas you ever expressed during 7 years of marriage. So whose authentic self are you actually expressing? The question seemed to hit him like a physical blow. For the first time since his announcement, Ryan looked genuinely uncertain, rather than confident in his choice. You're confusing him, Sophia snapped, abandoning her therapeutic calm entirely. This is exactly the kind of gaslighting we've been working to protect him from. Gaslighting, I said, thoughtfully. That's an interesting term choice, Sophia, because gaslighting involves making someone question their own perception of reality by providing false information or denying their experience. Like telling someone their marriage is inauthentic when it was actually satisfying until you convinced them otherwise. I turned to address the room again, my voice carrying the confidence I'd built through years of marketing presentations and courtroom-level research. Everything you've witnessed tonight demonstrates exactly how Sophia's system works. She identifies what people value most, convinces them it's holding them back, then positions herself as the solution to problems she created. Ryan valued our marriage, so she taught him to see it as a limitation. He valued loyalty, so she reframed betrayal as authenticity. He valued stability, so she convinced him that stability was stagnation. The psychological manipulation was now visible to everyone in the room, laid bare under the elegant lighting of Portland's most exclusive restaurant. But here's what makes tonight truly special, I said, my voice taking on the satisfied tone of someone about to deliver a final revelation. While Sophia has been teaching Ryan about authentic living and personal truth, she's been living a completely false life herself. Sophia went very still, her face losing all color as she realized that my investigation had gone far beyond documenting her business practices. Should I tell everyone about your authentic self, Sophia? About the real person behind the wellness guru facade? The question hung in the air like a threat and a promise, while 30 of Portland's most influential people waited to discover just how deep this rabbit hole actually went. The color drained from Sophia's face as she realized I was about to expose something far more damaging than unethical business practices. Her carefully constructed persona of enlightened wellness guru was about to crumble in front of the very people who had elevated her to Portland's spiritual elite. Natalie, whatever you think you know, Sophia began, her voice losing its practiced serenity for the first time in years. I don't think I know anything, I interrupted, pulling out a second phone from my purse. I have documented evidence of everything, including your real name, your real background, and the criminal history you've been hiding from every client, business partner and lover you've manipulated over the past decade. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant as people processed the implications of what I'd just revealed. Sophia wasn't just unethical in her business practices, she was living under false pretenses entirely. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the room, I'd like you to meet Sarah Michelle Kovac, originally from Detroit, Michigan, former pharmaceutical sales representative, former insurance fraud investigator and, according to Michigan state records, former defendant in a case involving embezzlement of client funds from a substance abuse treatment center. Sophia, or Sarah as I now knew her real identity to be, stood frozen as her world imploded in real time. The spiritual guru who had built an empire on authentic living had been living the most inauthentic life imaginable. "The charges were dropped," she said weakly, grasping for any semblance of defense, "because you fled Michigan before the trial and changed your name when you arrived in Oregon 7 years ago," I continued relentlessly. "Right around the time you met me at that meditation retreat where you claimed to be a traveling spiritual teacher finding her way home to the Pacific Northwest." Dr. Caroline West was now staring at Sophia with undisguised horror as she realized the extent to which she'd been deceived. "You told me you had your doctorate from UC Berkeley. You showed me credentials." "Forged credentials," I confirmed, consulting my second phone. "Sarah Kovac has a bachelor's degree in business administration and 18 months of pharmaceutical sales training. No psychology education, no therapy training, no wellness certifications from any legitimate institution." Lucas Bennett had gone completely pale, his business mind calculating the legal exposure they all faced for operating a therapeutic business with unlicensed practitioners. "The state licensing board," he whispered. "If they find out we've been operating without proper credentials, they already know," I said calmly. "I filed a formal complaint 3 weeks ago, along with documentation of every session Sophia conducted, every treatment plan she created, and every client she manipulated while impersonating a licensed mental health professional." The revelation hit the room like an earthquake. A dozen phones began buzzing simultaneously, as people received notifications that news of the scandal was already breaking online. I'd timed everything perfectly, ensuring that multiple agencies and media outlets would receive my evidence packages simultaneously with the public confrontation. "This is insane," Tyler Adams said, staring at his phone screen. "Natalie, there are already news articles publishing. How did you coordinate all this?" "Very carefully," I replied, "and with help from people who understand the importance of stopping predators before they can hurt more victims." Patricia Ford, my business mentor, was nodding approvingly from her table. As the former investigative journalist who had guided my evidence-gathering process, she understood better than anyone the meticulous planning required to expose a criminal enterprise this sophisticated. "Sarah Kovac," I continued, using Sophia's real name, deliberately to strip away the last vestiges of her false identity, developed her psychological manipulation techniques while working in pharmaceutical sales, where she learned to identify vulnerable patients and convince them they needed expensive treatments for conditions that could be managed more simply and affordably. Ryan was staring at Sophia with growing horror as he began to understand the depth of deception that had shaped his recent decisions. "You lied about everything, your education, your background, even your name." "I became Sophia Harper because I wanted to help people," she protested, her voice cracking under the pressure. "Everything I built here was about healing and growth." "Everything you built here was about money and control," I corrected. "The healing was incidental at best, counterproductive at worst. You identified people in emotional crisis, convinced them they needed extensive treatment, then provided that treatment in a way that ensured they never recovered enough to leave your programs." Grace Thompson stood up from her table, her social services background making her the most qualified person in the room to assess the implications of what I was revealing. "Natalie, are you saying that Sophia has been operating an unlicensed therapy practice while using false credentials to gain client trust?" "That's exactly what I'm saying. And the evidence doesn't stop there." I turned my attention back to Ryan, my voice softening with what might have been genuine sadness. "Ryan, do you remember when you first started having doubts about our marriage? The specific moment when you began questioning whether you were living authentically?" Ryan frowned, clearly struggling to pinpoint when his certainty about our relationship had first wavered. "It was gradual. Sophia helped me recognize patterns that had been there all along. Actually, it started during your 3rd session with her, when she introduced what she called your relationship inventory. Do you remember what that involved?" "She asked me to examine areas where I felt restricted or unfulfilled," Ryan said slowly, his confidence in the memory already beginning to waver. She asked you to create a list of everything about our marriage that prevented you from feeling completely free. Then she helped you expand that list during subsequent sessions, adding items you hadn't originally thought of until the list became so extensive that our relationship appeared fundamentally incompatible with your happiness. I pulled up what appeared to be notes on my phone. Session 4. You mentioned that I sometimes worked late. By Session 8, that had become Natalie prioritizes her career over our relationship. Session 6. You said I preferred quiet evenings at home. By Session 10, that had become Natalie is resistant to growth and adventure. The systematic nature of the manipulation was becoming clear to everyone in the room, including Ryan himself, who was now staring at Sophia with dawning understanding. You took normal relationship dynamics and reframed them as fundamental incompatibilities, Ryan said, his voice hollow as he processed what had been done to him. That's her specialty, I confirmed. Sarah Kovac learned in pharmaceutical sales that healthy people don't buy expensive treatment, so she became expert at convincing healthy people that they were actually sick. When she transitioned to therapy, she simply applied the same principle to relationships. Happy couples don't need extensive counseling, so she convinced happy couples that they were actually miserable. Caroline West was now rifling through her own files, apparently cross-referencing client cases with the pattern I'd described. The outcome statistics, she murmured. I always wondered why our success rates were so much lower than industry standard. Because success was never the goal, I explained. Dependency was the goal. The longer clients stayed in treatment, the more money they generated, the more they questioned their existing relationships and support systems, the more they relied on Sophia's guidance for major life decisions. Lucas Bennett was frantically making phone calls, probably trying to contain the legal and financial damage that was about to engulf their business empire. But I'd designed this revelation to be containment-proof, with evidence packages already delivered to regulatory agencies, law enforcement, and media outlets. The truly brilliant part, I continued, was how Sarah created a system that made questioning her methods seem like resistance to healing. If clients expressed doubt about their progress, they were told that doubt was part of the healing process. If family members expressed concern about the financial cost or time commitment, they were labeled as obstacles to authentic growth. I turned to address the broader room, my voice carrying the authority I'd developed through years of marketing presentations and legal research. This is why so many of you found yourselves supporting Sophia's work even when aspects of it felt uncomfortable. She created a framework where criticism of her methods was automatically reframed as evidence that the methods were necessary. The psychological sophistication of the manipulation was now visible to everyone present, laid bare under the elegant lighting of Portland's most exclusive restaurant. But Sarah made one critical mistake, I said, my voice taking on the satisfied tone of someone about to deliver the final blow. She assumed that everyone around her was as vulnerable to manipulation as her carefully selected client. She never considered that someone might be documenting her techniques, studying her methods, and building a comprehensive case against her entire operation. Sophia, or Sarah, was now visibly shaking, her hands clenched into fists, as she realized that her empire was collapsing in real time. You've destroyed everything I built. Years of work helping people find their authentic selves. I've exposed a criminal enterprise disguised as therapy, I correct, and I've prevented you from destroying more marriages, more families, and more vulnerable people who trusted you with their emotional and financial well-being. The room had fallen completely silent, except for the persistent buzzing of phones as news of the scandal continued to spread through Portland's interconnected social networks. Ryan, I said, turning to my husband with a mixture of sadness and resolve, I want you to understand something important. The problems you thought you discovered in our marriage weren't real problems. They were normal aspects of a long-term relationship that Sarah systematically reframed as incompatibilities to serve her own agenda. Ryan was staring at his hands, his face cycling through shame, anger, and what appeared to be genuine grief as he processed the extent to which he'd been manipulated. How do I know what's real anymore? He asked quietly. If she manipulated my perceptions so completely, how can I trust any of my feelings or thoughts about our relationship? The question pierced through my anger and satisfaction, reminding me that Ryan was as much a victim in this scenario as anyone else. Sarah had targeted. His betrayal of our marriage had been real and painful, but it had been orchestrated by someone who specialized in destroying healthy relationships for profit. That's going to take time to figure out, I said honestly. Deprogramming from this kind of manipulation doesn't happen overnight. But the first step is recognizing that your recent thoughts and feelings about our marriage weren't entirely your own. Grace Thompson approached our table, her professional training making her qualified to assess the psychological damage that had been inflicted. Ryan, Natalie is right that recovery from this kind of manipulation requires professional help, but it needs to be from someone with actual credentials and ethical boundaries. Unlike the person who's been treating him, Caroline West said bitterly, her own professional reputation now in ruins by association with Sarah's fraudulent practices. Caroline, I said, turning to address the doctor who had enabled so much damage, you're a licensed therapist with legitimate credentials. How did you not recognize that Sophia was operating without proper training or ethical oversight? Caroline's face flushed red as she struggled to defend her role in the deception. She was convincing, her techniques seemed effective, and her clients appeared to be making progress. Toward dependency on her guidance, not toward independence and emotional health, I corrected. As a licensed professional, you had an obligation to verify her credentials and monitor the ethical boundaries of your collaboration. The professional failure was as damaging as the criminal deception, creating multiple layers of accountability that would reshape Portland's wellness industry for years to come. Ladies and gentlemen, I announced to the room, I want everyone here to understand that what you've witnessed tonight represents just the surface of this investigation. The evidence I've collected spans 3 years and involves dozens of clients, multiple business partners, and a sophisticated network of financial fraud that extended far beyond simple therapy scams. I opened the folder on our table and pulled out what appeared to be financial documents. Sarah Kovac created a system where client payments were processed through multiple shell companies, allowing her to avoid taxes, hide assets, and provide kickbacks to referring professionals who sent vulnerable clients to her program. Lucas Bennett's phone calls had become increasingly frantic as he apparently discovered the extent of his own legal exposure in the financial fraud scheme. The referral network alone involves over 30 licensed therapists, medical doctors, and wellness professionals who received payments for sending clients to Serenity without disclosing those financial relationships to their patients. I continue. Several people in the restaurant were now actively leaving, recognizing that their association with Sophia's operation was about to become a serious professional liability. Caroline West, for instance, received a $5,000 bonus for every client she referred to Serenity's intensive programs, plus quarterly payments based on how long those clients remained in treatment. Caroline stood abruptly, her chair crashing to the floor. That's a confidential business arrangement that has nothing to do with patient care. Actually, it has everything to do with patient care, because it created a financial incentive for you to refer clients to expensive treatments they didn't need, and to discourage them from seeking second opinions or alternative approaches that might be more effective and affordable. The ethical violations were mounting with each revelation, creating a cascade of professional and legal consequences that would reach far beyond Sarah's immediate operation. The most disturbing aspect, I said, my voice carrying across the increasingly empty restaurant, is how Sarah used the trust and vulnerability of people in genuine emotional crisis to build a criminal enterprise that destroyed their relationships, depleted their savings, and left them more psychologically damaged than when they started treatment. I turned back to Ryan, who was still staring at his hands with the hollow expression of someone whose entire reality had been systematically dismantled. Ryan, I need you to understand that the man who announced he was leaving me tonight wasn't really you. It was a version of you that Sarah constructed, through months of psychological manipulation, using techniques she learned from pharmaceutical sales training, and refined through years of exploiting vulnerable therapy clients. How do I get back to who I really am? Ryan asked, his voice barely audible above the chaos that was consuming the restaurant around us. By recognizing that the authentic self Sarah convinced you to pursue was actually a fabrication designed to serve her agenda, not your genuine growth or happiness, I replied. Tyler Adams, who had been silent through most of the revelations, finally spoke up. "This is insane, Ryan. You've been completely brainwashed by someone who was essentially running a psychological con game, more than a con game, I correct, a sophisticated criminal enterprise that combined identity theft, professional fraud, financial manipulation, and psychological abuse into a system that generated hundreds of thousands of dollars in illegal profits while destroying dozens of relationships and families." The scope of the criminal operation was finally becoming clear to everyone present, transforming what had appeared to be a simple case of unethical therapy into something far more serious and far-reaching. "Sarah Kovac didn't just steal money from her clients," I explained. "She stole their ability to trust their own judgment, their confidence in their relationships, and their sense of authentic self-identity. She convinced them that happiness required her ongoing guidance, that independence meant selfishness, and that questioning her methods indicated resistance to growth." As if summoned by my words, the elevator doors opened to reveal two people in professional suits, who surveyed the chaotic restaurant scene with practiced detachment. "Detective Stevens," I said, recognizing one of the investigators I'd been working with for the past 6 months. Perfect timing. The detective approached our table while his partner began speaking quietly with restaurant management about securing the scene and protecting potential evidence. "Harper," Detective Stevens said formally, "we've reviewed the evidence packages you submitted, and we're prepared to proceed with arrests based on the fraud, identity theft, and professional impersonation charge." Sarah finally seemed to understand that this wasn't just a public embarrassment that she could overcome with better marketing and damage control. This was a criminal investigation that would result in actual legal consequences for her years of fraudulent practices. "I want a lawyer," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That's certainly you're right," Detective Stevens replied professionally. "Sarah Michelle Kovac, you're under arrest for identity theft, professional impersonation, financial fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft by deception." As the detective began reading Sarah her rights, the restaurant erupted into chaos as people realized they were witnessing actual arrests, rather than just a dramatic family confrontation. "Caroline West," Detective Stevens continued, "you're also under arrest for conspiracy to commit professional fraud and violation of professional ethics statutes." Caroline's face went completely white as she realized that her licensed career was ending along with her freedom. "This is what justice looks like," I said to the remaining guests, my voice carrying clearly over the commotion. "Not just exposure and embarrassment, but actual accountability for the people who exploit vulnerable clients for financial gain." As Sarah was handcuffed and led toward the elevator, she turned back to look at me with undisguised hatred. "You've destroyed everything I worked to build. I've prevented you from destroying more families," I replied. "There's an important difference." The elevator doors closed behind Sarah and Caroline, taking them away from the elegant restaurant where they'd expected to witness my humiliation, and instead had experienced their own downfall. Ryan was still sitting at our table, staring at the space where Sarah had been standing just moments before. "I can't believe I was going to leave you for her. I can't believe I thought she was helping me find my authentic self. She's very good at what she does," I said gently. "The manipulation techniques she used are sophisticated and effective. That's why she was able to build such an extensive client base and operate for so long without being caught." "How did you figure it out?" Ryan asked. "How did you know to investigate her when everyone else, including licensed professionals, believed she was legitimate?" The question brought everything full circle, back to the moment, 3 years ago, when I'd first suspected that something was fundamentally wrong with Sophia's operation and my relationship with my twin sister. "Because I know the real Sophia Harper," I said quietly, "and the person running Serenity Wellness Center wasn't her." The silence that followed my revelation hung in the air like a held breath. Ryan's question about how I'd known to investigate Sarah echoed through the nearly empty restaurant, where only the most curious or invested witnesses remained after the arrest. The weight of what I was about to reveal would reshape not just Ryan's understanding of recent events, but his comprehension of our entire relationship and the woman he'd married 7 years ago. "The real Sophia Harper," I began slowly, savoring the moment I'd been building toward for 3 years, "was my identical twin sister, who died in a car accident in Detroit 6 years ago. The same accident that Sarah Kovac was supposed to die in, but survived by switching identities with my sister in the hospital. The words landed like physical blows on the few remaining guests. Grace Thompson actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth as she processed the implication. Tyler Adams was staring at me with an expression that suggested he was questioning everything he thought he knew about reality. Sarah didn't just steal a random identity, I continued, my voice steady despite the enormity of what I was revealing. She specifically chose to become my twin sister because she'd been researching my background, my family connections, and my financial resources for months before the accident. She needed an identity that would give her access to Portland's business community, and the credibility to launch her fraudulent therapy practice. Ryan had gone completely pale, his hands trembling as he reached for his wine glass. You're saying that the woman that I thought was your sister, she's been dead for 6 years. Sophia died on impact when a drunk driver hit her car on Interstate 90. Sarah Kovac was in the passenger seat, critically injured but conscious enough to switch their purses and identification before emergency responders arrived. When Sarah woke up in the hospital 3 days later, she was officially Sophia Harper, and my real sister was buried under Sarah's name in a pauper's grave in Michigan. The calculated cruelty of the identity theft was now fully visible, transforming what had seemed like professional fraud into something far more personal and devastating. Patricia Ford was shaking her head in amazement at the complexity of the deception. Natalie, how did you discover the truth? How could you possibly have uncovered something that sophisticated? Because Sarah made one critical mistake, I replied, pulling out what appeared to be a worn photograph. She assumed that being an identical twin was just about physical appearance. But Sophia and I had been inseparable for 30 years. We had private jokes, shared memories, family stories that no amount of research could replicate perfectly. I held up the photograph, showing 2 young girls who were indeed physically identical but whose expressions and body language revealed subtle differences that only someone who knew them intimately would notice. The first time I met Sarah at that meditation retreat, she told a story about our childhood that was close to accurate, but wrong in small details that only the real Sophia would have known. She said we'd built a treehouse in our backyard when we were 8. We actually built a fort in our basement when we were 9. She remembered our grandmother's name, but got her maiden name wrong, tiny inconsistencies that would be invisible to anyone else but felt wrong to me. Lucas Bennett, who had finished his frantic phone calls and returned to witness the final revelations, was staring at me with undisguised horror. You've known she was an imposter for 6 years, and you never said anything. I suspected something was wrong, but I didn't have proof. And more importantly, I didn't understand the scope of what she was planning. At first I thought she might be suffering from some kind of memory loss from the accident. It took me almost 2 years to realize she was deliberately deceiving me. I opened my phone and scrolled to what appeared to be a detailed timeline. That's when I started my real investigation, not just into her business practices, but into her true identity and what had happened to my actual sister. Grace Thompson leaned forward, her social services background making her understand the psychological complexity of what I'd endured. Natalie, living with someone who was impersonating your dead sister must have been incredibly traumatic. Why didn't you contact authorities immediately when you confirmed your suspicions? The question went to the heart of everything I'd been planning for the past 3 years. Why had I chosen this elaborate public exposure instead of simply turning Sarah over to police when I'd first confirmed her identity theft? Because I wanted to understand the full scope of her criminal enterprise before exposing it, I replied. If I'd reported the identity theft immediately, she would have been arrested for that crime alone. But she was using my sister's stolen identity to commit much more extensive fraud that was damaging dozens of people. I wanted to document everything so that all her victims could get justice, not just closure for my family. The explanation was partially true, but it didn't capture the deeper psychological motivation that had driven my years of careful planning. The reality was more complex, and more personal than simple concern for Sarah's other victims. There's something else, I said, my voice taking on a different quality as I prepared to reveal the most shocking aspect of this entire confrontation, something that will help everyone understand why tonight had to happen exactly the way it did. Ryan was staring at me with growing alarm. apparently sensing that whatever I was about to reveal would be even more devastating than what had already been exposed. Sarah Kovac didn't just randomly choose to steal my sister's identity. She specifically targeted Sophia because she'd been stalking our family for over a year before the accident, gathering information about our finances, our relationships, and our vulnerabilities. I pulled out a thick folder that I hadn't yet opened, placing it on the table where everyone could see it. This contains evidence that Sarah had been planning to destroy my marriage and steal my husband long before she ever met him. Ryan wasn't the target of opportunity he thought he was. He was the primary objective of a 3-year psychological warfare campaign. The revelation hit Ryan like a physical blow, his face cycling through confusion, horror, and what appeared to be nausea as he processed the implications. "That's impossible," he whispered. "I met Sophia through you. She was your sister. You met Sarah through me, after she'd spent months studying your psychology, your career, your interests, and your vulnerabilities. Every conversation you thought was spontaneous was actually scripted. Every insight she offered about your authentic self was based on detailed research into your personality and behavioral patterns." I opened the folder and pulled out what appeared to be handwritten notes. "Sarah kept detailed files on you from the very beginning. Your work schedule, your exercise routine, your favorite restaurants, your childhood traumas, your relationship insecurities. She knew more about your psychology than most licensed therapists learn about their patients over years of treatment." Tyler Adams was now staring at the documents with fascination and revulsion. "This is like something out of a psychological thriller. She created an entire fake identity, just to steal your husband, not just to steal him," I correct, "to destroy me completely while building her criminal empire using the credibility that came from being my sister, and Ryan's sister-in-law. My reputation in Portland's business community gave her access to clients she could never have reached as Sarah Kovac from Detroit." The scope of the deception was now fully visible, revealing a years-long campaign that had targeted not just Ryan or me individually, but our entire life together as a foundation for Sarah's fraudulent business empire. "But here's what Sarah never understood," I said, my voice taking on the satisfied tone of someone about to reveal their ultimate victory. "While she was studying us and planning our destruction, I was studying her and planning something far more comprehensive." Patricia Ford was nodding with what appeared to be professional admiration for the complexity of my counter-strategy. "Natalie, what exactly have you been planning?" "I've been systematically destroying every aspect of Sarah's stolen life while building an unassailable case against her criminal enterprise. But more than that, I've been manipulating her behavior and decisions for the past 2 years, leading her toward tonight's revelation in a way that would expose not just her crimes but the network of people who enabled and profited from them." The admission that I had been actively manipulating Sarah rather than simply investigating her changed the entire dynamic of the evening's revelation. Every major decision Sarah made about her business, her relationships, and her targeting of Ryan was influenced by information I deliberately provided or withheld. I didn't just discover her plans, I shaped them to serve my own agenda. Ryan was staring at me with an expression that suggested he was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about the woman he'd been married to for 7 years. "Natalie," he said slowly, "are you saying that you've been controlling Sophia's behavior the entire time?" "I'm saying I've been strategically influencing Sarah's choices while documenting her crimes and building a comprehensive case that would destroy her completely when the time was right. Tonight was always the end game, but the path to tonight was carefully orchestrated to maximize the damage to her and everyone who enabled her." The revelation that I had been actively manipulating the manipulator created a new level of psychological complexity that was visible in the faces of everyone still present. "For example," I continued, consulting my phone, "Sarah's decision to target our anniversary for this public revelation wasn't her idea. It was a suggestion I planted during a conversation 6 months ago, when I mentioned how symbolic anniversary celebrations were for couples making major life transitions." I scrolled through what appeared to be recorded conversation. Her choice of the Observatory Restaurant was based on my casual comment that the glass walls and elevated setting would create perfect visibility for important announcements. Her decision to invite this specific group of people followed my suggestion that witnesses from the business community would add credibility to any major personal declaration. The systematic nature of my manipulation was becoming clear, revealing that Sarah had been as much a puppet in my hands as Ryan had been in her. Even her technique for breaking up our marriage was influenced by therapeutic language and concepts I introduced during our conversations, making her believe she was developing sophisticated psychological insights when she was actually following a script I'd provided. Grace Thompson was staring at me with what appeared to be professional fascination mixed with concern. "Natalie, you're describing a level of psychological manipulation that's almost as sophisticated as what Sarah was doing to her clients." "More sophisticated," I correct, because Sarah's manipulation was designed to create dependency and extract money. My manipulation was designed to document crimes and deliver justice. The distinction was important, but it didn't diminish the disturbing reality that I had spent 2 years systematically controlling another person's behavior to achieve my own objectives. The timing of tonight's revelation was also carefully planned, I continued. Sarah's business was reaching a point where her illegal practices were becoming harder to conceal from regulatory oversight. Her relationship with Ryan was progressing toward a confrontation that would expose her to legal liability for alienation of affection and professional misconduct. By orchestrating tonight's events, I ensured that her downfall would be public, comprehensive, and legally actionable. Lucas Bennett was shaking his head in amazement at the complexity of the strategy I'd employed. "You've been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. I've been protecting myself and building a case for justice while Sarah was focused on short-term financial gain and personal gratification," I replied. The difference in perspective and planning horizon made her ultimately predictable and controllable. Ryan was still processing the revelation that his recent psychological journey had been manipulated not just by Sarah but indirectly by me through my influence on Sarah's techniques and timing. "How much of what I've been feeling and thinking has been authentic?" he asked, his voice hollow with the recognition that his autonomous decision-making had been compromised from multiple directions. "That's something you'll need to work through with a legitimate therapist," I replied honestly. "But I can tell you that Sarah's influence on your thinking was based on psychological vulnerabilities and insecurities that existed before she began targeting you. My influence on her was designed to accelerate and expose her manipulation, not to create it." The distinction was subtle but important, suggesting that while I had manipulated the manipulator, I hadn't directly manipulated Ryan's psychology in the way Sarah had. "The real tragedy," I continued, "is that Sarah had genuine intelligence and could have built a legitimate business if she'd chosen ethical practices and authentic credentials. Instead, she chose to build her empire on stolen identity, fraudulent practices, and the systematic destruction of vulnerable people's relationships and financial security." Tyler Adams had been quiet through most of these revelations, but now he spoke up with a question that went to the heart of the evening's events. "Natalie, what's your endgame here? What do you actually want to achieve with all this manipulation and exposure?" The question hung in the air as everyone waited for my response. What did I want? Justice for Sarah's victims? Revenge for her theft of my sister's identity and her targeting of my marriage? Protection for future potential victims of her fraudulent practice? "I want Sarah to understand that actions have consequences," I said finally. "She spent years believing she could manipulate and control other people without facing accountability for the damage she caused. She thought her intelligence and psychological skills made her untouchable." I gestured toward the empty restaurant where Sarah had been arrested just hours earlier. "Tonight, she learned that there are people more intelligent and more strategic than she is. People who are willing to invest years in documenting crimes and building cases that will deliver real justice rather than just temporary advantage." The philosophical difference between Sarah's short-term exploitation and my long-term justice strategy was now fully visible to everyone present. "But more than that," I continued, "I want everyone who enabled her practices to understand their own accountability. Dr. Caroline West, Lucas Bennett, the referring therapists who took kickbacks, the business community leaders who promoted her without doing due diligence. They all played roles in allowing Sarah's criminal enterprise to flourish." Patricia Ford nodded approvingly at the comprehensive scope of my accountability strategy. "You've created consequences not just for the primary perpetrator, but for the entire network that made her crimes possible." "Exactly, because predators like Sarah don't operate in isolation. they build networks of enablers who profit from looking the other way or actively participating in fraudulent practices. Real justice requires dismantling those networks, not just punishing the most visible criminals. The systemic approach to justice was evident in how the evening's revelations had exposed multiple layers of criminal and ethical violations across Portland's wellness and business community. "Ryan," I said, turning back to my husband, "I need you to understand that while you were manipulated by Sarah, you also made choices that hurt our marriage and violated our commitment to each other. The manipulation doesn't excuse the betrayal, even though it explains." Ryan nodded slowly, his face reflecting the complex emotions of someone grappling with both victimization and accountability. "I know, and I understand if you can't forgive me for what I was planning to do tonight. Forgiveness is something we'll have to work toward," I replied honestly. "But the first step is making sure you get help from legitimate professionals to understand how the manipulation affected your thinking and decision-making." Grace Thompson stood up from her table, apparently preparing to leave but wanting to offer final thoughts on what she'd witnessed. "Natalie, what you've accomplished tonight is remarkable, but I hope you'll also seek counseling to process the trauma of losing your real sister and living with her imposter for so many years." The suggestion reminded everyone present that while I had orchestrated Sarah's downfall, I had also endured years of psychological trauma that would require its own healing process. "I've already begun working with a trauma specialist," I assured her. "Someone with impeccable credentials who has no connection to Portland's wellness community or any of the people who enabled Sarah's practices." The final detail demonstrated the thoroughness with which I'd planned not just Sarah's exposure, but my own recovery and protection from the psychological damage her deception had caused. As the evening wound down and the remaining witnesses began to leave, Ryan and I found ourselves alone at the table where our marriage had supposedly ended, but had actually begun a new phase of painful honesty and potential reconstruction. "What happens now?" Ryan asked, his voice carrying the uncertainty of someone whose entire understanding of recent events had been systematically dismantled. "Now we find out whether our marriage can survive the truth," I replied. "All of Sarah's manipulation, your betrayal, my deception about what I knew and when I knew it. We find out if what we built together over 7 years is strong enough to withstand what we've both done to it." The honest assessment captured the complexity of our situation, where victim and perpetrator roles had blurred across multiple relationships and timelines. "I want to try," Ryan said quietly. "If you're willing to work with me through this, I want to try to rebuild what we had before Sarah destroyed it." "Before Sarah influenced it," I corrected, because destroying it would have required my cooperation, and I never stopped fighting for our marriage. "I just fought in ways you couldn't see until tonight." The distinction was important, suggesting that while our relationship had been severely damaged, the foundation remained intact beneath the manipulation and deception that had nearly torn it apart. As we sat in the elegant restaurant where Portland's elite had witnessed the spectacular downfall of one of their most celebrated spiritual leaders, I realized that the evening had delivered everything I'd planned for 3 years. Justice for Sarah's victims, exposure of the criminal network that had enabled her, protection for future potential targets, and the truth about my sister's death and stolen identity. But perhaps most importantly, it had created an opportunity for Ryan and me to rebuild our marriage on a foundation of complete honesty about who we really were and what we were capable of doing to protect what mattered most to us. The game was over, the justice was served, and the real work of healing and reconstruction could finally begin. 3 months after the anniversary that became Portland's most talked-about scandal, I sat in the sterile visiting room of the Multnomah County Detention Center, waiting for my final conversation with the woman who had stolen my sister's identity and nearly destroyed my marriage. Sarah Kovac looked dramatically different from the poised wellness guru who had commanded respect at exclusive restaurants and spiritual retreats. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 pounds since her arrest, and her hair had grown out enough to reveal dark roots beneath the expensive blonde highlights that had been part of her Sophia Harper persona. When she shuffled into the visiting room, wrists shackled and eyes hollow with the defeat of someone whose entire constructed reality had collapsed, I felt no satisfaction. Only the quiet resolve of someone who had spent years planning this moment and now needed to see it through to its conclusion. "Hello, Sarah," I said, using her real name deliberately as she settled into the plastic chair across from me. Ned, her voice was barely a whisper, stripped of the confident authority that had once convinced dozens of vulnerable people to trust her with their emotional and financial well-being. I wasn't sure you'd come. I needed to understand something, I replied, studying her face for any remnant of the charismatic imposter who had built an empire on stolen identity and manipulated psychology. I needed to know if you ever felt genuine remorse for what you did to my sister, to Ryan, to all those clients whose lives you damaged for profit. Sarah stared at her shackled hands for a long moment before responding. Your sister was already dead when I switched our identity. I didn't kill her, but you erased her, I said quietly. You buried her under your name in an unmarked grave and stole not just her identity, but her relationships, her family connections, and her future. You let our parents believe their daughter was alive while grieving for a stranger. The accusation hung between us like a physical weight. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't determine whether they represented genuine guilt or self-pity for her current circumstances. I was dying in that hospital, Sarah said finally. Multiple internal injuries, brain trauma, massive blood loss. The doctor said I might not survive the night. When I saw Sophia's purse beside my bed and realized we looked identical, it felt like a miracle. A chance to escape everything I'd done wrong in Detroit and start over with a clean slate. A clean slate that belonged to someone else, I corrected. A clean slate that required lying to grieving parents, stealing family relationships, and eventually targeting my husband as part of your long-term con game. Sarah flinched at the harsh assessment, but didn't tend to defend her actions. 3 months in detention had apparently stripped away the psychological defense mechanisms that had allowed her to justify years of criminal behavior. When did you first decide to target Ryan? I asked, consulting notes I'd brought to ensure I gathered complete information during our final conversation. Not immediately, Sarah admitted. At first I really was just trying to survive and build a legitimate wellness practice. But when I met you and saw your life, your marriage, your success, I started to resent how easy everything seemed for you. The honesty was more disturbing than any lie she could have told. Sarah's criminal escalation had been driven not by desperation or mental illness, but by jealousy and entitlement. You had everything I'd always wanted, Sarah continued. A stable relationship, professional success, financial security, social status. It seemed unfair that you'd been born into advantages I'd had to steal and fight for. So you decided to destroy what I'd built rather than create your own legitimate success. I convinced myself I was helping Ryan discover his authentic self, that your marriage was holding him back from reaching his potential. It was easier to believe that than to admit I was destroying a good relationship, because I couldn't stand watching other people be happy. The psychological honesty was devastating in its simplicity. Sarah had targeted my marriage not because it was genuinely flawed, but because its happiness highlighted the emptiness of her own stolen existence. The therapy techniques you used on Ryan, I said, shifting to more specific questions about her manipulation method. Where did you learn those psychological manipulation strategies? Pharmaceutical sales training, Sarah replied without hesitation. They teach you how to identify emotional vulnerabilities in doctors and patients, how to create urgency around problems that might not require immediate intervention, how to position your product as the solution to issues the customer didn't know they had. The casual revelation of how corporate sales training had been weaponized into psychological manipulation was chilling in its implications for other potential predators with similar background. I adapted those techniques for relationship counseling, identifying ways that couples were supposedly incompatible and positioning myself as the guide who could help them discover their authentic self. Most people desperately want to believe they're more evolved and self-aware than their current circumstances suggest, and the financial fraud network, the shell companies, the kickback schemes, the unlicensed practice violation. Sarah almost smiled at the question, apparently finding some remnant of pride in the sophistication of her criminal enterprise. I studied how legitimate therapy practices operated, then created parallel structures that looked identical but diverted money through companies I controlled. The referring therapist thought they were participating in professional networking, not criminal conspiracy. until they started receiving financial incentives for referrals that created conflicts of interest with patient care. By then, they were too invested in the system to ask uncomfortable questions. People have an amazing capacity for willful blindness when their financial interests are involved. The observation demonstrated Sarah's keen understanding of human psychology, which made her crimes even more disturbing because they represented deliberate exploitation of predictable vulnerabilities, rather than impulsive criminal behavior. "Sarah," I said, leaning forward to ensure she understood the seriousness of my next question, "do you understand why I spent 3 years documenting your crimes instead of reporting them immediately when I discovered your identity theft?" Her eyes met mine for the first time during our conversation, and I saw a flicker of the analytical intelligence that had made her such a successful predator. "You wanted to build a comprehensive case that would prevent me from manipulating my way out of accountability," she said slowly. "If you'd reported just the identity theft, I might have been able to plea bargain or serve minimal time, but by documenting the entire criminal enterprise, you ensured that I would face serious consequences that matched the scope of damage I'd caused." "Partially correct," I replied, "but there was something more personal involved." Sarah waited for me to continue, her expression suggesting she was finally ready to hear the complete truth about my motivations and planning. "I needed to understand exactly how you'd stolen my sister's life and what you'd planned for mine. I needed to document not just your crimes, but the psychological techniques you used so that other people could recognize and resist similar manipulation in the future." I pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between us. "But most importantly, I needed to prove to myself that I was smarter, more strategic, and more committed to justice than you were to exploitation and personal gain." Sarah stared at the folder with obvious apprehension. "What's in there?" "Evidence of how thoroughly I controlled your life for the past 2 years while you thought you were controlling mine and Ryan's. Documentation of every decision you made that was actually influenced by information I provided or withheld. Proof that the master manipulator was herself being manipulated by someone with a longer-term strategy and stronger motivation." The revelation that her downfall had been orchestrated rather than discovered hit Sarah with visible force. Her face went pale as she processed the implications of what I was telling her. "You've been controlling my behavior the entire time?" "Not controlling," I corrected. "Influencing, providing you with opportunities to make choices that revealed your true character while documenting your crimes, and building an unassailable case for prosecution. The difference is that my manipulations served justice, while yours served only personal gain." I opened the folder and showed her detailed timelines of our conversations over the past 2 years, highlighting specific moments where I had planted suggestions that influenced her subsequent decisions. "Your choice to target our anniversary for Ryan's public declaration of independence. That was based on my casual comment about the symbolic power of anniversary celebrations for couples making major life transitions." Sarah's eyes widened as she recognized the conversation and realized how she'd been guided toward that decision. "Your selection of the Observatory Restaurant with its glass walls and elevated setting." I mentioned during a different conversation how important visibility was for significant announcements, and you unconsciously incorporated that guidance into your planning. Each revelation demonstrated the systematic nature of my influence on her choices, showing how her supposedly sophisticated manipulation had been guided by an even more sophisticated counter-manipulation. "Even your therapeutic techniques with Ryan were influenced by psychological concepts I introduced during our discussions, making you believe you were developing insights when you were actually following a script I'd provided." The comprehensive nature of my control over her decision-making was becoming clear, transforming Sarah from predator to puppet in a way that visibly shook her understanding of her own agency and intelligence. "Why?" she whispered. "Why go to such elaborate lengths when you could have simply reported me to authorities years ago?" The question went to the heart of everything I'd planned and executed. Why had I chosen this complex psychological chess game instead of simpler, more direct just? "Because I wanted you to experience the same loss of autonomy and control that you inflicted on your victims," I replied honestly. "I wanted you to discover that your entire recent life had been guided by someone else's agenda, just like you did to Ryan and dozens of therapy clients." The psychological symmetry of the justice was now visible to both of us. Sarah had manipulated others into making decisions that served her interests while believing they were exercising autonomous choice. I had manipulated her into making decisions that documented her crimes, while she believed she was executing her own strategic plan. But more than that, I continued, I wanted to demonstrate that intelligence and psychological sophistication could be used for justice and protection rather than exploitation and personal gain. I wanted to prove that predators aren't untouchable just because they're smart and charismatic. Sarah was now crying openly, the full weight of her situation and my strategic superiority finally breaking through whatever psychological defenses had sustained her through 3 months of detention. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry about your sister, about Ryan, about all the people I hurt. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to build a legitimate life instead of stealing someone else." The apology was more comprehensive than I'd expected, but I wasn't sure whether it represented genuine remorse or simply the desperation of someone facing decades in prison. "Sarah, your sentencing hearing is next week. The prosecutor is recommending 25 years based on the evidence I provided. Do you understand that your choices over the past 6 years have effectively ended your life as a free person?" "I understand," she replied, wiping tears with her shackled hand. "I also understand that I deserve whatever consequences the court imposes. What I did was unforgivable." The acknowledgement of accountability was something I'd needed to hear, but it didn't diminish the tragedy of wasted potential and destructive choices that had brought us to this sterile visiting room. "There's one more thing I need you to understand," I said, preparing to deliver my final message. "The reason I'm here today isn't to gloat or to extract more apology. It's to make sure you comprehend the complete scope of what justice looks like when someone systematically targets vulnerable people for exploitation." I pulled out a second folder and placed it beside the first. "This contains information about the civil lawsuits that 37 of your former clients are filing against your estate and business partners. Financial restitution that will ensure you never profit from your crimes, even if you serve reduced time for cooperation." Sarah stared at the folder with growing alarm as she realized that her legal consequences extended far beyond criminal prosecution. Dr. Caroline West lost her license and is facing criminal charges for conspiracy and professional misconduct. Lucas Bennett is under federal investigation for financial fraud and money laundering. The referring therapists who took kickbacks are facing professional sanctions and potential criminal charges. The systematic destruction of her entire criminal network was becoming clear, demonstrating that justice involved more than just punishing the primary perpetrator. Everyone who enabled or profited from your practices is facing consequences proportional to their involvement. What comprehensive accountability looks like. Sarah was now sobbing uncontrollably, overwhelmed by the scope of destruction that her choices had brought, not just to herself but to everyone who had been part of her fraudulent enterprise. "Natalie," she said through her tears, "is there anything I can do to make amends, any way to help the people I hurt or honor your sister's memory?" The question suggested a genuine desire for redemption, though I wasn't sure whether it was motivated by authentic remorse or desperate hope for reduced consequences. "You can serve your sentence without appeals or legal maneuvers designed to minimize your accountability," I replied. "You can cooperate fully with ongoing investigations into other potential victims or criminal associates, and you can live with the knowledge that your choices destroyed not just other people's lives, but your own potential for authentic happiness and meaningful relationships." The harsh assessment was designed to ensure that Sarah understood the complete cost of her criminal choices, both for her victims and for herself. "I will," she promised. "I'll accept whatever sentence the court imposes and cooperate with any investigation. I won't try to minimize what I did or shift blame to other people." The commitment to accountability was more than I'd expected, but time would determine whether it represented genuine change or simply expedient cooperation with inevitable consequences. As our conversation drew to a close, I found myself studying Sarah's face one final time, looking for any resemblance to my real sister that might explain how she'd successfully impersonated Sophia for so many years. But the physical similarity that had enabled the identity theft was overshadowed by fundamental differences in character and motivation that no amount of cosmetic resemblance could bridge. "Sarah," I said as I prepared to leave. I hope you use your time in prison to understand what authentic self-improvement actually looks like, not the manufactured insights you sold to vulnerable clients, but genuine examination of what led you to make such destructive choices. I will, she replied. And Natalie, thank you for stopping me before I could hurt more people. I know that wasn't your primary motivation, but the outcome serves justice even if the method was revenge. The distinction between justice and revenge was something I'd wrestled with throughout my 3-year investigation. Had I been pursuing accountability for Sarah's victims, or simply elaborate payback for her targeting of my family? Maybe both, I admitted honestly. Maybe justice and revenge aren't always mutually exclusive when someone systematically destroys innocent people's lives for personal gain. As I walked out of the detention center and into the Portland afternoon, I realized that my conversation with Sarah had provided the closure I'd needed to move forward with rebuilding my life and marriage. She would spend the next 25 years in prison contemplating the consequences of her choices, while I would spend the same time period building something authentic and meaningful from the wreckage of her deception. The game was finally over. Justice had been served, and the real work of healing and reconstruction could begin in earnest. Sarah Kovac had learned what it meant to be completely controlled by someone else's superior strategy and longer-term vision. She had discovered that intelligence without ethics was ultimately self-destructive, and that predators who target vulnerable people will eventually encounter someone stronger, smarter, and more committed to justice than they are to exploitation. As I drove home to Ron, who was making genuine progress in therapy with a legitimate counselor, I reflected on the strange satisfaction of proving that good people could be more strategic and psychologically sophisticated than criminal predators when properly motivated by love, and the determination to protect others from harm. The woman who had stolen my sister's identity and targeted my marriage was now facing the complete destruction of her stolen life, while the family she'd tried to destroy was slowly rebuilding itself on a foundation of painful honesty and hard-won wisdom about the true nature of authentic relationships. In the end, that seemed like the most perfect form of justice imaginable. 6 months after Sarah's sentencing, I stood in the doorway of what had once been Serenity Wellness Center, now stripped bare and marked with foreclosure notices. The space that had housed Portland's most celebrated spiritual empire was nothing more than empty rooms with exposed brick walls and dusty floors where dozens of vulnerable people had once sought healing and found exploitation instead. Ryan squeezed my hand as we surveyed the hollow remnants of Sarah's criminal enterprise. His therapy sessions with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a trauma specialist with impeccable credentials and no connection to Portland's compromised wellness community, had helped him understand the depth of psychological manipulation he'd endured while rebuilding his sense of autonomous decision-making. "It feels surreal," Ryan said quietly, his voice carrying none of the manufactured competence that had characterized his speech during his months under Sarah's influence. 6 months ago I thought this place represented enlightenment and personal growth. Now it just looks like what it always was. An empty shell designed to extract money from people's pain. The transformation in Ryan's perspective was remarkable, achieved through legitimate therapeutic work that focused on independence rather than dependency, healing rather than prolonged treatment, and authentic self-discovery rather than prescribed identity reconstruction. Walsh says I might always have some uncertainty about which thoughts and feelings are genuinely mine versus residual programming from Sarah's manipulation. Ryan continued, studying the abandoned reception area where clients had once waited for sessions that promised transformation but delivered exploitation. That uncertainty might actually be healthy, I replied, threading my fingers through his as we explored the empty building together. Sarah's victims all shared one characteristic: absolute certainty that they'd found someone who understood their authentic selves better than they did. Questioning your own perceptions and seeking multiple perspectives on important decisions isn't weakness, it's wisdom. The insight had emerged from my own therapy sessions with Dr. Patricia Morrison, a specialist in trauma recovery who had helped me process the complex grief of losing my sister while simultaneously being deceived by her imposter for years. Learning to trust my instincts again while remaining open to growth and change had required delicate psychological work that respected both my analytical nature and my emotional needs. We moved through the former group therapy room where Sarah had conducted her infamous relationship deconstruction session, convincing happy couples that their partnerships were preventing spiritual growth, while extracting thousands of dollars for guidance that systematically destroyed their foundations of trust and communication. 37 relationships, Ryan said, apparently remembering the statistics I'd presented during our anniversary confrontation. 37 couples who thought they were investing in their futures together but were actually paying someone to tear them apart. 34 of those couples have reached out to me since Sarah's trial, I said, consulting my phone where I'd been tracking the ongoing aftermath of the criminal investigation. Most are working with legitimate therapists now, trying to understand what was authentic about their relationship problems versus what was manufactured by Sarah's manipulation. The ripple effects of Sarah's systematic destruction continued to unfold across Portland's social landscape, with former clients struggling to rebuild trust in both their relationships and their own judgment after years of psychological exploitation disguised as spiritual guidance. Are any of them reconciling? Ryan asked, his question carrying obvious personal relevance as we continued our own difficult process of rebuilding our marriage on foundations of painful honesty rather than comfortable illusion. 18 couples are working together to recover from Sarah's influence. 11 decided that legitimate problems existed alongside the manufactured conflicts, and they're pursuing healthy separation with proper counseling. The remaining 8 are still trying to determine which relationship issues were real versus fabricated. The statistics illustrated the complex aftermath of psychological manipulation that extended far beyond simple fraud into the fundamental ways people understood their own emotions and relationships. We climbed the stairs to Sarah's former private office, where she had conducted the most intensive manipulation sessions with clients who could afford premium rates for what she called accelerated consciousness evolution. The room that had once projected serene authority with its carefully curated spiritual decor now contained nothing but carpet stains and nail holes where inspirational artwork had hung. This is where she recorded our sessions, Ryan said, pointing to a corner where sophisticated audio equipment had once been concealed behind decorative screens. Walsh helped me understand that Sarah was documenting client conversations, not for therapeutic review, but to identify psychological vulnerabilities she could exploit for deeper manipulation. The revelation that Sarah had been systematically cataloging client weaknesses for strategic exploitation rather than treatment had emerged during the criminal investigation, adding charges of privacy violations and professional misconduct to her extensive list of crimes. She kept detailed files on every client's childhood traumas, relationship insecurities, financial pressures, and family dynamics, I said, remembering the evidence I'd gathered that had proven instrumental in the prosecution's case. Information that should have been used to promote healing was instead weaponized to create dependency and extract maximum financial benefit. Ryan was studying the empty space where Sarah's desk had once dominated the room, positioned to project authority while making clients feel vulnerable and exposed during their session. I remember sitting in that chair across from her desk, feeling like she could see straight through to my soul, Ryan said, his voice carrying the wonder of someone recognizing past delusion. Now I understand that the insights she offered weren't spiritual they were calculated observations based on information she'd systematically gathered about my psychology and background. The distinction between authentic therapeutic insight and manufactured wisdom based on strategic intelligence gathering was something many of Sarah's former clients were struggling to understand as they worked with legitimate professionals to rebuild their sense of personal agency. Dr. Walsh says that one marker of ethical therapy is that clients gradually need less guidance rather than more, Ryan continued, sharing insights from his recovery process. Legitimate therapists work themselves out of jobs by helping clients develop independent decision-making skills. Sarah's model required clients to become increasingly dependent on her approval for major life choices. The contrast between healing and exploitation was now clearly visible to Ryan, though his ability to distinguish between the two had required months of patient work with a therapist whose credentials and ethics were beyond reproach. We moved to the building's rooftop terrace, where Sarah had conducted group sessions and networking events designed to expand her client base, while creating an atmosphere of exclusive spiritual community. The space that had once buzzed with conversations about consciousness elevation and authentic living now offered only panoramic views of Portland's skyline and the Columbia River Valley stretching toward the mountains. "I've been thinking about forgiveness," Ryan said, as we stood against the terrace railing, looking out over the city where our drama had unfolded. "Not for Sarah, but for myself, for being vulnerable to manipulation, for betraying our marriage, for losing faith in my own judgment." The process of self-forgiveness had been one of the most challenging aspects of Ryan's recovery, requiring him to acknowledge his own accountability, while recognizing the sophisticated nature of the psychological manipulation he'd endured. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that self-forgiveness doesn't mean minimizing the harm we've caused, I replied, sharing insights from my own therapeutic journey. "It means taking responsibility for our choices, while learning to make better decisions, based on clearer understanding of our vulnerabilities and values." The balance between accountability and compassion had been essential for both our individual healing processes and our efforts to rebuild trust in our marriage. I still struggle with wondering how much of my attraction to Sarah's teachings reflected real dissatisfaction with our relationship versus manufactured discontent, Ryan admitted, his honesty reflecting the progress he'd made in therapy. "Maybe both existed," I said, turning to face him directly. "Maybe you had legitimate concerns about our marriage that you hadn't known how to express, and Sarah exploited those natural relationship tensions to serve her own agenda." The acknowledgement that our marriage had contained authentic challenges alongside Sarah's manufactured conflicts had been crucial for our rebuilding process, allowing us to address real issues, while rejecting the distorted perspectives that had nearly destroyed our partnership. "What concerns were legitimate?" Ryan asked, apparently ready for a conversation we'd been approaching gradually through months of couples counseling with Dr. Elizabeth Chen, a marriage therapist recommended by Dr. Walsh for her expertise in helping couples recover from third-party manipulation. "You felt like I prioritized work over our relationship sometimes," I said honestly. "That was fair. My business consumed enormous energy, and I didn't always protect our time together or communicate my needs clearly." The admission represented genuine self-reflection, rather than the therapeutic performance that had characterized so much of Ryan's interaction with Sarah. "You wanted more adventure and spontaneity in our lifestyle," I continued. "I tend toward routine and planning, sometimes at the expense of flexibility and new experience. But those were normal relationship dynamics that couples work through together," Ryan said, demonstrating his growing understanding of the difference between authentic challenges and fundamental incompatibility. "Sarah convinced me they were signs that we were fundamentally mismatched rather than areas where we could grow and compromise." The reframing of ordinary relationship work as evidence of hopeless incompatibility had been central to Sarah's strategy for dissolving her clients' partnerships, while positioning herself as the solution to problems she'd magnified beyond realistic proportions. Chen says that healthy relationships involve ongoing negotiation and mutual adaptation, Ryan said, sharing concepts from our couples therapy. The idea that perfect compatibility should exist without effort was one of Sarah's most damaging lines. As we prepared to leave the abandoned building that had once housed Sarah's empire of manipulation, I felt a profound sense of closure settling over the events that had reshaped our lives so dramatically. The woman who had stolen my sister's identity and targeted my marriage was now serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison, while the network of professionals who had enabled her crimes faced their own consequences, ranging from professional sanctions to criminal prosecution. "Natalie," Ryan said as we descended the stairs from the rooftop terrace, "I need you to know that I understand what you did to expose Sarah wasn't just about justice for her victims. It was also about protecting our marriage in a way I was too manipulated to appreciate at the time." The recognition that my 3-year investigation had served multiple purposes, including the preservation of our relationship, was something Ryan had worked through extensively in therapy. "I spent years watching you become someone I didn't recognize," I replied, locking the building behind us as we returned to the Portland afternoon. "Someone who questioned everything about our life together, who spoke in therapeutic language that didn't sound like your natural voice, who seemed to need permission from Sophia for decisions you'd once made independently. I became a different person, Ryan agreed. Someone whose thoughts and feelings were shaped by Sarah's agenda rather than my own authentic development. Getting back to my real self has required learning to distinguish between growth and manipulation, between insight and program. The psychological recovery process had been challenging for both of us, requiring patience and professional guidance to rebuild trust while processing the trauma of deception that had affected our marriage and individual identity. As we drove home through the Pearl District streets where Sarah's false identity had once commanded respect and influence, I reflected on the strange satisfaction of knowing that justice had been comprehensive rather than partial. Not only had Sarah faced appropriate consequences for her crimes, but the entire network of enablers and beneficiaries had been held accountable for their roles in perpetuating systematic exploitation of vulnerable people. Walsh asked me something interesting yesterday, Ryan said as we navigated the familiar route to our renovated home, now free of the surveillance equipment that Sarah had recommended for our security but had actually used to monitor our private conversations. What did she ask? Whether I thought you'd been justified in manipulating Sarah the way you did, whether psychological manipulation could be ethical when it served justice rather than exploitation. The question went to the heart of moral complexity that had shaped my strategic response to discovering Sarah's identity theft and criminal enterprise. What did you tell her? That I didn't think you'd manipulated Sarah so much as outsmarted her, Ryan replied thoughtfully. You gave her opportunities to reveal her true character while documenting her crimes. The difference between what you did and what she did was that your deception served protection and accountability, while hers served personal gain and destruction. The distinction was important for my own sense of ethical accountability, though I continued working with Dr. Morrison to ensure that my response to Sarah's manipulation hadn't compromised my own moral integrity or psychological health. I'm proud of what you accomplished, Ryan said as we pulled into our driveway, surrounded by the garden we'd been rebuilding together as a symbol of our marriage's renewal. You saved not just our relationship but dozens of other people from continued exploitation. You proved that predators aren't untouchable just because they're intelligent and charismatic. The validation meant more to me than any public recognition or professional accolades could have provided, representing Ryan's understanding of the complex motivations and long-term planning that had driven my investigation and strategic response to Sarah's crime. 6 months after the anniversary dinner that had exposed Portland's most celebrated wellness guru as a criminal imposter, Ryan and I had rebuilt our marriage on foundations of authentic communication, mutual respect, and hard-won wisdom about the nature of manipulation versus genuine growth. Sarah Kovac would spend the next 2 decades in federal prison contemplating the consequences of her choices, while we would spend the same time period building something real and meaningful from the ashes of her deception. The game was finally over, justice had been served completely, and the future stretched ahead of us, filled with possibilities that no imposter or manipulator could touch. We had survived the ultimate test of love and loyalty, emerging stronger and more committed to protecting what mattered most to us. In the end, that seemed like the most perfect victory imaginable. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.